Well, it's not about where the birds go, it's about where the people go. So the people go to where the birds are, and they, like, it's society for bird watching. Anyway, I think we're getting a little bit off topic. So you're interested in buying a DSLR camera. I think you said Canon or Nikon. I personally would go with Canon, like I said, because I have brand loyalty. One major consideration that you want.
What is that?
Well, so I'll tell you. I'm going to tell you right now. One major consideration when you are buying a fancy camera like this is that if you buy a Canon right now, and then you want to buy a Canon 5 years from now, and you want to be able to have the lenses be interchangeable, if you buy another Canon, then you would be able to use the same lenses. So I have a Canon DSLR camera. My mom has a Canon DSLR camera. So we switch our lenses in and out, and we borrow lenses from each other, and they both fit because they're both Canon cameras. But if I wanted to borrow a lens from someone with a Nikon camera, it wouldn't fit on my camera. Does that make sense?
Is it because it's different measurement, like what's millimeters, and then the Canon and the Nikon, are they different millimeters? Is that why they don't fit together? That's why they're not compatible.
No, it's not about the size of the lens necessarily in millimeters. It's more about how the lens is made and how they make it to fit on the camera itself. So what's your price range? That's kind of
like a
important
car, like the motor. You can't, with a Toyota and a BMW, you can't just switch out the engines, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Ford, you can't just, they all have to be the same parts, they're like the same company, is that right?
Pretty much. So again, what's your price range?
Around 2,000, around between 2,000 and 4,000.
Oh my gosh, you can get a really nice camera for $2K. I mean, this is not Best Buy conversation. That's what I thought we were having. 2,000, wow. Yeah, you could buy directly from Canon for that price, and you could probably get a good deal.
I was at Best Buy and I saw a $1,000 camera there, $800 camera there. 8,000, excuse me, interpreter error. And it was beautiful. It had the good movie capabilities as well, but I really just want to focus on it was around 3,000. It already had video capability in it, ready to go. You could do movies or still frames, kind of like the iPhone. You had different choices, photo, video. You could switch back and forth between the two. Is that worth it, or is it better to not really worry about the video portion and just focus on the still frame?
Well, a lot of the nicer cameras come with video as integrated into the system now. So if you're wanting to do video, that's perfectly feasible. What I would recommend though is if you're wanting to do video, that you buy a memory card with a large capacity, because video takes up a lot of memory. So if you just buy a little 1 gigabyte memory card for your camera, then you're not really going to be able to shoot a lot of photo and video. You would want to buy something with at least 8 gigabytes, but really that would be the minimum. I would say if you're wanting to shoot a lot of video, something more like above 30 gigabytes for your memory card.
Fun.
I'm sorry, my phone's ringing. Hello? No, I can't talk right now. I'm in a meeting. I know. No, I'll call you later. Bye. I'm sorry. My phone rings all the time.
Very popular person.
No, I'm really just busy.
You're busy and there's nothing here. There's no one here.
You can be a busy person and not have people around you, trust me.
Back in the 1700s, Adam Smith was the first person to formalize a model of international trade. Smith figured out that if countries specialized in producing those items where they had absolute advantage means that your country can produce the good at a lower resource cost than other countries in production, and purchased items where they had an absolute disadvantage in production, they'd be better off. So if country A could produce food using less labor than country B, and country B could produce furniture using less labor than country A, then it would be mutually beneficial for the countries to trade with each other. About 100 years later, David Ricardo pointed out a flaw in the model. He argued that while England, let's say, had absolute advantage in most types of products, that is, England could produce most items using fewer resources, it could still gain by specializing in production according to comparative advantage rather than absolute advantage. Comparative advantage means that your country can produce at the lowest indirect or opportunity cost. I saw an example years ago in Todd Buchholz's book, From Here to Economy, that has become my absolute favorite for illustrating the different types of productive advantages and the resulting trade patterns. He uses Gilligan's Island. In his example, the world is like Gilligan's Island. On the island, the only two people who seem to produce anything are the skipper and Gilligan. Because their group is marooned on an island, Gilligan and Skipper need to provide for the basic necessities for their 5 passengers. Food and shelter. Inexplicably, the passengers all seem to have enough clothing to last for years, even though it was supposed to be a 3-hour pleasure cruise. Since they're on an island, it's natural that they'll be eating a lot of fish dinners, and then they'll also need to build huts for shelter. To build a single hut, framing it, adding walls, thatching the roof, Skipper needs 20 hours. Gilligan, on the other hand, is not very competent. He tends to knock the hut over a time or two before completion and takes 45 hours to finish a hut. Skipper can get down to the lagoon, catch enough fish for 7 people, come back, clean the fish, and cook the fish dinner in 10 hours. Gilligan, he falls into the lagoon, loses his equipment, and initially burns the dinner, taking 15 hours total to produce an edible fish dinner. One more piece of information I'm going to need here. How many resources do each of our producers have to work with? Well, Skipper's a pretty average guy, working 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. He takes the occasional week's vacation on the other side of the island to unwind, for a total of 2,000 hours. Gilligan, on the other hand, isn't as skilled as Skipper at producing, but he's got a good heart and will work extra hard until he makes things right. In the end, Gilligan works 3,600 hours per year. Think about it. Isn't that the way things work in the real world? Which countries are more like the Skipper, skilled labor but not as much of it, and which countries are more like Gilligan, with lots of unskilled labor? Okay, in terms of who should be producing which product, what would Adam Smith say? Remember, Smith thought that specialization should be dictated by who has absolute advantage, that is, who can produce at the lowest resource cost. In this case, Skipper actually produces both items using less labor hours, so he has absolute advantage in both products. Smith would say that Skipper should produce both products. What should Gilligan do? Well, he can't really hurt anyone if he sits in his own little corner of the island and produces both as well. Let's say that the two producers each split their resources, time, evenly among the two products. Skipper will spend 1,000 hours on hut building and 1,000 hours on fish dinners. In the end, Skipper builds 50 huts and creates 100 fish dinners. In the meantime, Gilligan will spend 1,800 hours on hut building and 1,800 hours on fishing. Ultimately, he will build 40 huts and create 120 fish dinners. In total, the overall island production between the two producers is 90 huts and 220 fish dinners. Now, what would David Ricardo say? Remember, Ricardo thought that specialization should be dictated by who has the comparative advantage, that is, who can produce at the lowest opportunity cost. You can go back to episode 8 if you need a refresher on opportunity cost. How do we know where the comparative advantage lies? Well, let's start by taking a look at Skipper. Every hut he builds takes 20 hours. Had he used the 20 hours on fishing, he could have produced 2 fish dinners. So Skipper's opportunity cost of producing 1 hut is that he sacrifices 2 fish dinners. What about Gilligan? He takes 45 hours to build a hut, in which time he could have produced 3 fish dinners. This means that Skipper has comparative advantage in hut production. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, of course Skipper has comparative advantage. He's better at everything. This is not necessarily true. Let's look at fish dinners. To produce a fish dinner takes the Skipper 10 hours, or he sacrifices 1/2 of a hut. Gilligan takes 15 hours, but he sacrifices only 1/3 of a hut. Gilligan actually has the comparative advantage in fishing because he sacrifices less or has the lowest opportunity cost. According to Ricardo, Skipper should devote himself and his resources solely to producing huts. If he uses all 2,000 hours on hut production, he can produce a total of 100 huts. Gilligan uses all of his resources for fishing and can produce 240 fish dinners. What do you notice about total island production? Specialization according to comparative advantage yields total output of 100 huts and 240 fish dinners, compared to the 90 huts and 220 fish dinners that are produced when following specialization according to absolute advantage. What does this mean in the real world? Specialization according to comparative advantage leads to increased global production, which means better living standards for everyone. Next time, trade restrictions.
That we were going to raise funds for this project, a few different projects actually on campus that we wanted to renovate. We had to go through the DC Revenue Bond Program, contact that department, and then they gave us a huge stack of paperwork, a bunch of things that we had to abide by and sign. And we had to fill all that out in order for them to give us the authority to sell bonds. So after we contacted the district's government, we were required to meet a few different conditions, but these were the 3 most important. So the source of employment said that if DC local government was willing to give us the authority to issue tax-exempt bonds, then we must give the district's workers and contractors first priority in the project when we were creating our tax-exempt bonds. So basically what that means is when we were building Dorm 6 and we had the money ready for the project, we of course had the construction site and maybe 20-30 different temporary places there because they all have to construct different things and build different things, right? So DC says that 51% of those workers in that particular project have to be located in residents of DC. But it makes sense though that any government agency that is going to give you the authority to build in their city and create infrastructure would also want to benefit their employees and their residents first. So of course we had to meet that demand and decide who exactly was going to be in the building construction of Dorm 6. So with the contractors in DC, we had to negotiate different things, different specifications, create different positions such as maybe supervisor, electrician, drywall, different categories such as that. And then contact the DC source of employment services and see where we could get DC residents that were qualified for those positions, and then negotiate with them. And that way we would be able to sign local citizens and meet the government's demands. We also had to be certified business entrepreneurship, which basically means that DC, if they fund you to get bonds, that they want to see the economy developed. So business and entrepreneurship has different preference priorities when they're issuing bonds. So basically, if we have a contractor who moved to set up the wiring and the plumbing lines in dorm 6, if we hired a local business to do all of that, then we would get credit, and it would assist us, and it'd be easier for us to get approval next time we want to apply for tax exempt bonds. But if, let's say, we awarded the contract to an outside business and gave them all of the jobs, then we would have a much tougher time next time receiving the authority to sell bonds. And one of the last requirements by DC was to, and something I never really thought about, but after we went through the process, it seemed really obvious. But of course, this was our first time. Essentially, the DC local community, they have to support the project. So if you have, let's say you have a qualified organization that wants to build, suppose a hospital, and it's in a quiet neighborhood, a quiet street. So they get approval for the project, but then the local community gets upset because they have nowhere to park, it's noisy, there's traffic. So DC wants to make sure that we're working with the local community. Ward 5, which is our district, so we went to their meeting over kind of northeast. We went to a conference there to present our ideas and our intentions for this new building project. But we wanted to assure them that it would be inside of our gated community. Essentially, it would not affect their everyday living. And the local community voted, they approved, they supported our project, and we sent that letter to the DC Constitution saying that Gallaudet's project was now supported. Of course, we had to meet their deadline.